Welcome back to Beans and Bezels. In this video, we will be taking a look at the MMI Heritage 38 chronograph, which just launched a few days ago on Kickstarter. MMI is a microbrand out of Singapore, and by this point, they are no longer a brand I would describe as new or unproven. Since 2019, they have released 9 model families across divers, chronographs, GMTs, field watches, and more experimental Lume-focused pieces. I've personally reviewed the Cuttle Chron and the Awagami Factory collaboration pieces, and what I've generally found is a brand that has become progressively stronger with case execution, bracelet quality, and unusual dial and lume ideas, while staying pretty consistent with pricing. The watch we're looking at here is the new Heritage Chronograph, a VK63 meca-quartz chronograph that builds on the Heritage 38 platform and adds the brand's recognizable Rota-Date display to a compact 3-register chronograph layout. The main story, though, is the dial lineup: 1 classic black dial and 4 fully lumed color variants, including Horizon Blue, Heritage Tan, Arctic White, and this Vintage Salmon version. The white dial is particularly unusual because it uses white-emitting lume, while the salmon dial continues one of MMI's more interesting recent experiments with colored full lume surfaces. This is currently a Kickstarter project, and it appears to be fully funded at the time of publishing this article. Pricing starts at $379 for the super early bird tier, limited to 50 pieces, with the optional on-the-fly adjustable clasp available as an upgrade for $35. As with any Kickstarter watch, I would still approach it with the usual caution around timelines, final QC, and fulfillment risk. That said, MMI has delivered enough projects at this point that I think the risk profile is different from backing a completely unknown brand. Here I'll be looking at the Vintage Salmon full lume dial version on bracelet, fitted with the standard clasp rather than the on-the-fly micro-adjustment clasp option. Let's check it out. The case is not the most original or unusual part of this watch, but it might be my favorite case MMI has made so far because the proportions are excellent. I measured it at 38 millimeters in diameter, 44.5 millimeters from lug tip to lug tip, or 46.5 millimeters if you measure across the end links, with an overall thickness of 11.15 millimeters, including the slightly protruding boxed sapphire crystal. Add a 20 millimeter lug width and a 6.1 millimeter screw-down crown with a lumed MMI logo, and you end up with a compact chronograph that feels properly considered. The case build and finishing are also very good, and MMI has clearly gotten stronger here over the last few releases. The brushing, polished transitions, bracelet fit, and general solidity are about where I would expect from the better microbrands today. I also have to give them credit for achieving 100 meters of water resistance, which is impressive for a chronograph in this format. Even watches like the Speedmaster and Navi Timer have traditionally sat under 50 meters. It is a simple case, but the execution, dimensions, and wrist experience are excellent. The dial is easily the most interesting part of this watch, and probably where MMI does the best job of making this watch feel distinct. The salmon color is bolder than what I usually gravitate toward, and it can look a little too saturated in photographs. But in person, the matte, slightly textured surface helps control that personality. It is colorful without feeling glossy or overly loud, and the texture gives it enough softness to keep the watch feeling vintage adjacent rather than novelty driven. The contrast between the salmon base and blue hands, indices, and date numerals works very well. The blued elements appear to be PVD treated rather than thermally blued, which is understandable at this price point, especially given the number of components involved. The hands and markers catch enough light to add depth while maintaining strong legibility against the warmer dial surface. The Rota-Date display is one of the cleverer parts of the design and has become somewhat of a design signature for this brand and central to their identity. And I think that is a great achievement for a small brand like this. Instead of interrupting the dial with a conventional date window, the outer rotating date wheel becomes part of the dial architecture. It keeps the layout symmetrical, preserves legibility, and adds depth through the recessed, scalloped inner edge rather than feeling like a flat printed perimeter. The chronograph layout is the familiar VK63 arrangement with elapsed minutes at 9 o'clock, running seconds at 6 o'clock and a 24-hour day/night style register at 3 o'clock. The 24-hour register is not the most useful complication, but visually the 3-register layout suits the watch. What impressed me most, especially for a prototype, is the execution. The printing looks crisp, the applied markers appear cleanly aligned, and the overall quality control seems very strong. There is a lot happening here, but the proportions and finishing choices keep it coherent. The lume is an important part of this watch's identity, and on the Vintage Salmon it works very well in practice. Because the entire dial base is lumed, the watch remains plenty legible at night, with the hands standing out clearly against the glowing surface. The salmon pigment does seem to reduce some of the raw potency you might get from a more conventional full lume dial, but that feels like a reasonable trade-off for the color. It may not be the brightest execution possible, but it does not struggle with nighttime readability. The only weak point is the minute hand, where the lume plot is a bit small and tends to fade faster than the rest of the display. Fortunately, the fully lume dial base does a lot of the work, so legibility is rarely compromised in any meaningful way. It is also worth noting that the white dial variant uses white lume, similar to Ming's polar white, which is unusual and technically interesting in its own right, since white-emitting lume is far less common than the usual green or blue glow most brands rely on. This watch is powered by the Seiko VK63, a hybrid meca-quartz chronograph movement, and I think that is the right choice for a watch like this. At this price point, meca-quartz makes sense. It is accurate, low maintenance, keeps the case relatively thin, and still gives you a more engaging chronograph experience through the sweeping central chronograph seconds hand and mechanical style reset. I'm generally more comfortable with the VK63 in affordable chronographs than something like a Seagull ST19. The ST19 is a beautiful movement with real mechanical charm, but it asks more from the owner. It is not known for being especially robust or worry-free over the long term, so you need to be willing to accept the potential regulation, servicing, and reliability issues that may come with it. I know some collectors will look at 38mm and assume it is too small for a chronograph, but on my 6.75-inch wrist, the proportions feel just about perfect. The 44.5mm lug-to-lug keeps the case compact, the 11.15mm thickness, including the boxed sapphire crystal, keeps it sitting low, and the case hugs the wrist in the way you want from an easy, set-it-and-forget-it kind of watch. It has presence because of the dial, but the case itself is restrained and quite elegant. The bracelet is also very much in line with what I've come to expect from the brand lately. Good quality, clean finishing, and comfortable articulation on wrist. Sized for me, the watch weighs about 109 grams on the bracelet, which gives it enough substance without making it feel heavy. This prototype did not have the brand's on-the-fly adjustable clasp, and I believe the standard production watch will ship with this more traditional clasp by default. You can upgrade to the adjustable clasp for around $35 and I think that is absolutely worth doing. I've used their on-the-fly clasps before and they are solid. Overall, I think this might be my favorite release of theirs so far. The case proportions are excellent, the finishing is strong, and the Vintage Salmon dial is very attractive. I also think the Rota-Date display is very well integrated here, and the fully lume dial gives the watch a genuinely fun second character after dark. The VK63 is a sensible movement choice too, keeping the watch thin, affordable, and easy to live with. If I was forced to criticize it, I'd say the minute hand lume plot could have been larger. The 24-hour sub-dial is not very useful, and I would strongly recommend budgeting for the on-the-fly clasp upgrade. And since this is still a Kickstarter project, the usual caution around timelines, fulfillment, and final QC applies. But the brand has been around for a while now, with several successful releases behind them, so this feels like a more credible project than most first-time Kickstarter watches. And if their final production units are just as good as these prototypes, I think people are going to be very pleased. As always, thanks for watching, and please subscribe to this channel if you enjoyed this review.